Well, let's continue our conversation on the breaking news and bring in our legal panel for a fair and balanced discussion. Criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Bob Bianchi and trial attorney Nicholas Fortuna joins us now. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Bob, I want to start with you because we had heard now that the district attorney plans to retry this case, and I just want to first ask you, what is he up against?
I'm sorry, can you say that again, please?
I want to ask you what the DA is up against if he tries to retry this case.
Well, listen, the inertia, the ball is rolling downhill. As a prosecutor, you never want to retry a case. It's as simple as that. You have the burden of proof. You have to prove it to 12 jurors beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense now knows your prosecution strategy. They have transcripts for all the witnesses that testified. So if you can imagine that aggressive kind of cross-examination that occurred in this trial, you can only imagine what it's going to look like when they have the transcripts from the trial. So the inertia is really, really tough for the prosecutor in this kind of case to retry it and get a conviction, in my opinion.
Nicholas, I want to bring you in because we heard from Gloria Allred. She held a press conference. She had two alleged victims with her, and she had said what she took issue with in this particular trial is that there was 13 women that she wanted to testify, and only one was able to do so. Now, whether or not that was because the statute of limitations is way beyond my pay grade, but I want to ask you, if those women weren't allowed to testify, is it a possibility that we could see them in the future, and would that change the outcome?
It could change the outcome if you have more people piling on, accumulating evidence about the fact that Bill Cosby committed certain acts. However, I would say it's very, very dangerous for the judge to allow that kind of testimony. The appellate courts don't like prior bad acts coming in to influence what happened in this particular case. If you look at the testimony, Kelly Johnson testified that Bill Cosby had attacked her, and has nothing to do with what happened to Andrea Constant. Now, if they allow more victims to testify, it's likely...
But from a prosecutor's standpoint, you want that even if it doesn't have anything to do with your case, am I right?
Elizabeth, as a prosecutor, I got to tell you, I agree with what he's saying. There's an evidence rule, 404. I hate to get technical about it, but in court, you can only introduce that kind of evidence if it's relevant to something other than bad character, or that if you did this before, you must have done it here. That's exactly the reason you're not allowed to admit it, because they don't want to have multiple trials within trials. So as a prosecutor, when I've had 404 evidence that gets admitted, like was done in this case with one witness, you have to be very careful that you don't pile on bad character evidence. And then in the appeal, the courts look at it and say, the jury was given so much data about bad character that they did not or were unable to assess this particular case, as opposed to being poisoned by all of the other witnesses. So this judge and prosecutor were using restraint by not putting all of them on in order to protect a conviction. I know the public may not like to hear that, but you can imagine you don't want to be in a courtroom at a trial, or anybody would be in a courtroom, and having everybody come in for your entire life and say bad things about you.
A prosecutor's still going to try, though.
Yep, I wouldn't. And by the way, there's a precedent set in this case. The judges already ruled to what extent they're going to be allowed to introduce that evidence. So I think the prosecutor, they could certainly make the argument, but I think it will fail. There's a principle in the law where they say once a judge has made a decision in one part of a case, you're not going to relitigate it at another trial. So I don't think that being said,
but from a defense standpoint, she had also said, listen, it's way too early for Bill Cosby to be celebrating, and I want to bring you in, Nicholas, because it's really he wasn't acquitted.
Yeah, I agree with that. He wasn't convicted, which is better. I would really like to know what the count was. How many people were for conviction? How many people were against conviction? That's a big factor in a prosecutor determining whether or not they should retry a case. If they convinced 11 jurors, but there was only one holdout, that would lead towards a retrial, and the converse is true. I would say it's really problematic for a prosecutor to bring on prior accusations. I think most appellate courts would find it more prejudicial than probative, or it's not relevant to what happened in this particular case. They're going to find that the defendant was prejudiced by it and overturn it on appeal. I was surprised that the judge allowed that kind of testimony in this particular case. And you could tell this was not a good case for the prosecution, even with that testimony, and it weighs heavy on a jury that he committed these acts in the past. They still couldn't get a conviction.
Okay, Nicholas, unfortunately, I have to interrupt you. We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back after these messages.